What happens when a 7-time world champion walks into your team and suddenly you're the one playing catch-up? For Charles Leclerc, that isn't just a hypothetical question, it's the reality of his 2026 season. And now, a former F1 team principal has just issued a warning to Ferrari that could redefine how they handle their star driver. Here's the situation. Ferrari is in the middle of a season that was supposed to be theirs. They entered the mid-season break sitting second in the constructor standings with 307 points, trailing Mercedes by 72 points. Not a disaster, but not where they expect it to be either. On the driver's side, Lewis Hamilton sits second with 169 points, having already secured his first victory in Ferrari red at the Barcelona-Catalunya Grand Prix, plus 4 podium finishes. Charles Leclerc, meanwhile, is fourth with 138 points, 1 win at the British Grand Prix, 3 podiums, and 2 retirements that have cost him dearly. 31 points separate the 2 Ferrari drivers, and that gap has sparked the conversation that nobody in Maranello expected to be having. But here's the thing, this isn't just about points, this is about something much deeper. Otmar Szafnauer, the former Alpine team principal who knows a thing or two about managing driver dynamics, appeared on the High Performance Racing podcast alongside former Ferrari race engineer Rob Smedley and host Jake Humphrey. And when the topic of Leclerc's form came up, Szafnauer didn't mince words. "No," he said, "leave him alone. I would not have a conversation, but be supportive." That's right, the man who once ran an F1 team is telling Ferrari's management, do nothing. Now, before you write that off as lazy advice, let's break down why Szafnauer is saying this and why it might actually be the smartest move Ferrari could make. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our F1 coverage as we follow this story through the second half of the season. Szafnauer explained his reasoning in a way that cuts through the noise. Lewis at the beginning of the year, and I'm not speaking from facts, just a feeling I get, was a little bit more ahead of Leclerc than he is now, he said. I think Charles has stepped it up in the last 2 a little bit towards Lewis. That's a crucial observation. The trend line is moving in Leclerc's favor. The gap is closing. And if that's the case, why would Ferrari interrupt that momentum with a formal sit-down that could be perceived as a vote of no confidence? Rob Smedley, who worked on the Ferrari pit wall and knows exactly how that environment operates, backed up Szafnauer's assessment with some revealing context. I think this is the first time in a long time with Charles where his teammate has had a significant upper hand, Smedley explained. Think about that for a second. Charles Leclerc has been at Ferrari since 2019. He's outqualified Sebastian Vettel. He's gone wheel to wheel with Carlos Sainz. He's been the undisputed number 1. And now, for the first time in his Ferrari career, he's looking across the garage and seeing someone who's consistently getting more out of the car. That's a psychological adjustment that no amount of data analysis can prepare you for. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where the story takes a turn that most fans probably haven't heard about. Smedley revealed that Leclerc wasn't happy with the car, and that Ferrari had actually changed components around the braking system, types of material, and other technical adjustments. But despite all that, it felt like he was just slightly lost for a driver of his experience and how good he is. Slightly lost. Those 2 words are doing a lot of heavy lifting. Now, let's dig into what actually happened with those brakes, because this is where the technical story gets fascinating. At the Monaco Grand Prix, Leclerc crashed out of 3rd place after a late safety car restart. He didn't just spin, he was furious afterward, blaming a recurring braking issue that he said had affected him across the previous 2 race weekends. Out of the 4 brakes, I had 3 brakes not working. The problem was a safety car. As soon as I did the safety car, 3 of my 4 brakes stopped working. That's not a driver making excuses. That's a driver describing a mechanical failure that could have ended much worse than it did. Ferrari's brake partner Brembo responded publicly, expressing surprise at Leclerc's criticism. But Leclerc didn't back down. When asked in Barcelona whether his view had changed after reviewing what happened, he stood by his assessment. No, but yeah, again, I don't want to speak too much about what happened. I rarely speak quickly, but if I do, it's because I've checked beforehand, so I don't have much to add. That's a driver who knows exactly what he's talking about and isn't afraid to say it. The result, Ferrari made a change. Leclerc switched to the brake configuration that Hamilton had been using, carbone industrie discs instead of the Brembo setup that had been causing him problems. Interestingly, both drivers had actually tried Hamilton's configuration earlier in the season, but Leclerc had stayed with his original setup at the time. It was a decision that we made as a team to kind of split the cars, and the last 2 weekends have been more difficult than I initially anticipated, Leclerc admitted. This isn't just about brakes. This is about a driver who trusted a setup, realized it wasn't working, and is now making the adjustment. And he's doing it while his teammate, one of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport, is setting the benchmark. So why is Szafnauer so adamant that Ferrari should just leave him alone? Because Leclerc is already doing what needs to be done. He's acknowledged the deficit, he's made the technical changes, he's been open about the struggles, and most importantly, he's been closing the gap. The gap to Hamilton race by race. A Form 1 intervention at this point wouldn't add anything. It would just remind Leclerc and everyone else that Ferrari is worried about him. That's not support, that's pressure. Szafnauer's approach is different. Be supportive, he said. Not fix him, not talk to him, not remind him who he's racing against. Just be there, let him work, trust the process. And let's be honest, if there's anyone who knows about managing drivers through difficult periods, it's Szafnauer. He was the guy who helped shape Sebastian Vettel's early career at Red Bull. He ran Alpine through some of the most chaotic periods in recent F1 history. He's seen drivers crumble under pressure, and he's seen them rise to the occasion. He's also seen what happens when team management overreacts. Ferrari has a history of this, by the way. Remember when they called Sebastian Vettel in for a friendly chat after he started making mistakes? Remember how that worked out? Remember when they publicly questioned whether Charles Leclerc was ready to be the team leader? Those conversations don't help. They create tension. They plant seeds of doubt. And in a sport where hundreds of a second separate success from failure, doubt is expensive. The 2026 regulations have changed the game in ways that aren't always obvious from the outside. Greater energy recovery means the brakes aren't worked as consistently as in previous seasons. That's a technical challenge that affects every driver differently. Some adapt immediately. Others need time to recalibrate their muscle memory. Leclerc falls into that second category, and that's okay. What's not okay is treating him like he's broken. Smedley, who knows Leclerc's driving style intimately from his time on the Ferrari engineering team, put it perfectly when he said Leclerc was slightly lost. Not slow, not washed up, not overrated, just lost. And lost drivers find their way back when they're given space to do so. The data backs this up. Despite the 31-point gap, Leclerc has been matching Hamilton's pace in recent races. The British Grand Prix win showed what he's capable of when everything clicks. The podium finishes prove he's still competitive. The gap in the standings is as much about bad luck, those retirements in Monaco and Spain, as it is about performance. Here's the other thing that Szafnauer's advice gets right. Formula One is a confidence sport as much as it is a driving sport. When a driver feels like the team is questioning them, it shows up in their performance. Braking points become slightly earlier. Corner entries become slightly more cautious. Overtaking maneuvers become slightly less aggressive. It's not intentional, it's just what happens when doubt creeps in. Leclerc doesn't need more doubt. He needs to know that Ferrari believes in him. And if we're being completely honest, Ferrari needs to believe in him too, because while Lewis Hamilton is a generational talent, he's not getting any younger. Leclerc is the future of this team. Treating him like a problem to be solved rather than a talent to be nurtured would be a catastrophic mistake. Szafnauer isn't just giving advice about one driver. He's giving advice about how to run a Formula One team in an era where driver management is just as important as aerodynamic performance. So what happens next? Ferrari has a choice to make. They can follow Szafnauer's advice, leave Leclerc alone, provide support without pressure, and trust that a driver of his caliber will find his way back to his best form. Or they can do what teams often do when they're feeling the heat from the constructor standings: intervene, overcomplicate, and risk making things worse. The smart money is on Szafnauer being right, because here's the reality. Leclerc has already taken the steps he needs to take. He's switched brake configurations. He's been honest about his struggles. He's been closing the gap to Hamilton. He doesn't need a meeting. He doesn't need a reminder that his teammate is outperforming him. He needs space to do what he does best. And what he does best is drive a Formula One car faster than almost anyone on the planet. The second half of the 2026 season is going to be fascinating. Mercedes is leading the Constructors' Championship. Kimi Antonelli is leading the driver standings. Hamilton is chasing his 8th world title, and Leclerc is trying to prove that he's still the driver Ferrari believed in when they signed him to that that long-term contract extension. If Ferrari is smart, they'll listen to Szafnauer. They'll leave Leclerc alone, they'll be supportive, and they'll watch as one of the most talented drivers of his generation reminds everyone exactly why he belongs at the front of the grid. But if they don't, if they give in to the temptation to micromanage, to intervene, to have that conversation, they might just lose the best thing they have. And in a sport where the margins are measured in milliseconds, that's a risk no team can afford to take. Because if the driver is not fully comfortable with the car, the solution may not be simply a motivational conversation. It may be technical, and that changes everything. Formula One drivers do not operate independently of their machines. A driver can be performing at an extremely high level and still struggle if the car does not respond in the way they expect. The relationship between driver confidence and car behavior is incredibly important. Braking characteristics, balance, tire behavior, corner entry response, and overall stability can influence how comfortable a driver feels when pushing toward the limit. Smedley's comments suggest that Ferrari had been making changes around the braking system, while Leclerc was still trying to find the right feeling. That could help explain why his performance was not simply a straightforward reflection of his underlying ability. And this is where I think Szafnauer's advice becomes even more interesting. If the underlying issue is partly about the car, a formal conversation about the driver's form may not solve the real problem. Better approach could be to keep working with the driver and the technical group until the package becomes more predictable. In other words, Ferrari may need to solve the environment around Leclerc rather than simply asking Leclerc to solve himself. That does not mean Leclerc has no responsibility. Elite drivers are always expected to adapt, but there is a difference between asking a driver to adapt and assuming every performance gap is caused by the driver. That distinction can be crucial. And Ferrari has another problem sitting in the background. Mercedes is 72 points ahead in the Constructors' Championship. So while everyone is talking about Hamilton versus Leclerc, Ferrari's real championship battle is also with Mercedes. That means the team has limited room for internal distractions. Every point matters. Every podium matters. Every weekend where Ferrari fails to maximize its opportunity becomes more significant because the gap to Mercedes remains substantial. The easiest thing for a team to do during a difficult period is sometimes to search for a single explanation. But Formula One rarely gives you a single explanation. A driver can struggle because of car balance. A team can lose points because of reliability. A championship position can be affected by circumstances. A teammate can simply have a stronger weekend. And over a long season, all of those factors accumulate. That is why I think the most revealing part of Szafnauer's comments is not the phrase "leave him alone" by itself. It is what comes after that idea. Be supportive. That is the real message. He is not telling Ferrari to stop communication. He is telling them not to turn communication into unnecessary pressure. And that philosophy could be particularly relevant for Leclerc because of how long he has been under the microscope at Ferrari. For years, the expectations surrounding him have been enormous. He is one of the central figures of Ferrari's modern driver lineup, and every season comes with another round of questions about whether the team can finally build a car capable of matching its ambitions. Now, Hamilton is on the other side of the garage. That creates a completely different competitive environment. Instead of being compared primarily with previous teammates, Leclerc is now being measured against the 7-time world champion, who has already taken a Ferrari victory in 2026. That comparison is unavoidable, but it can also become dangerous if the team allows it to dominate every decision. A driver should not have to think about the championship standings every time he approaches a corner. The job is to drive. The team's job is to create the best possible conditions around that performance. That is where management becomes crucial. And Szafnauer has experience in that area. As a former team principal, he understands that a driver's performance cannot always be improved by simply increasing pressure. Sometimes the best leadership decision is knowing when not to intervene. That may sound counterintuitive in a sport where teams analyze almost everything, but Formula One is full of moments when restraint can be just as important as action. Ferrari now has a choice. It can treat Leclerc's current position as a problem that needs immediate management attention, or it can look at the recent trend and say, he is already responding, so let's support the process. Szafnauer clearly favors the second option, and there is a reason that makes sense. Leclerc already has a British Grand Prix victory this season. He already has 3 podium finishes. He has also had 2 retirements that have reduced his points total. So the story is not simply that Hamilton has been beaten by Leclerc. The more accurate picture is that Hamilton has built a stronger championship position, while Leclerc has also shown that he can produce major results and, according to Szafnauer's impression, has recently moved closer to Hamilton's level. That is a much more balanced interpretation. And it leads to another question. What happens if Leclerc continues closing the gap? Because suddenly a 31-point difference could start looking very different. One strong weekend can change the conversation. Two strong weekends can change the standings, and a run of consistent podiums can completely reshape the internal dynamic. That is why the next phase of the season becomes so important. Ferrari does not necessarily need a dramatic intervention. It may simply need Leclerc to keep building momentum. The team needs to keep developing the car. The drivers need to keep converting opportunities, and Ferrari needs to avoid turning every internal comparison into a headline. Because there is another reality here. Hamilton's success is not necessarily bad news for Leclerc. If Hamilton is consistently delivering strong results, that can give Ferrari a valuable reference point. Leclerc can compare data. The engineering group can compare approaches. The team can identify where the car is working and where it isn't. A strong teammate can be a benchmark, but the benchmark only becomes useful if the comparison remains constructive. That appears to be another reason why Szafnauer's supportive approach matters. Instead of saying, "You are behind Hamilton, so fix this," the team can effectively communicate, "We know you are capable of more, and we are here to help you find it." Those two messages sound similar. Psychologically, they are completely different. One increases pressure, the other creates confidence. And when a driver is operating at the absolute limit of Formula One, confidence matters enormously. There is also something fascinating about Smedley's comments. He described Leclerc's situation as unusual because it's been a long time since a driver had a teammate with such a significant advantage. That tells us how different this season is for Leclerc. He has not suddenly become an inexperienced driver. The competitive environment around him has changed. Hamilton brings a different level of experience, a different driving background, and an enormous history of success. So Ferrari is effectively watching two elite drivers solve the same car in different ways. That can be difficult, but it can also be extremely valuable. If Ferrari handles it correctly, the team could learn from both drivers. If it handles it poorly, the internal comparison could become a distraction, and that is the line Ferrari has to walk. The championship standings make the pressure obvious. Mercedes leads the Constructors' Championship with a 72-point advantage. Ferrari is second. Hamilton is second in the driver standings with 169 points. Leclerc is fourth with 138. But those numbers are not the end of the story. They are the reason the story matters, because Ferrari still has time to change the trajectory. Leclerc still has opportunities to gain points. Hamilton is still chasing the championship lead, and Ferrari still has to find a way to reduce the gap to Mercedes. That means the most useful thing the team can do may not be to create another internal event. It may be to focus on performance, improve the car, understand the braking changes, give both drivers confidence, and let the results speak. That is essentially where Szafnauer's argument leads. Do not confuse activity with progress. A formal meeting can look like action, but if the driver is already improving, the more valuable action may happen behind the scenes, through engineering work and support. And I think that is the part of the story that can easily be missed. Formula One teams are under constant pressure to demonstrate that they are doing something. When a driver falls behind, people want explanations. When a car behaves differently, people want immediate answers. When a teammate gains an advantage, people want management decisions. But sometimes the most professional response is simply to keep working. No dramatic announcement, no unnecessary confrontation, no attempt to manufacture a solution. Just preparation, analysis, and another race weekend. For Leclerc, that could be exactly what he needs, because the evidence presented by Szafnauer suggests that the situation may already be moving in the direction Ferrari wants. Hamilton was perceived to be further ahead earlier in the year. Now, Leclerc appears to have narrowed that difference, and if that trend continues, the conversation around Ferrari could change very quickly. Suddenly, the question will not be why Leclerc is behind, it will be how close he can get. That is a much more positive question, and it is one Ferrari should want to answer on the circuit rather than in a conference room. Of course, there is no guarantee that Leclerc will continue improving. There is also no guarantee that Hamilton's advantage will disappear. Formula One can change from one weekend to the next. The article does not provide a prediction for how the rest of the season will unfold, and neither should we pretend to know. What we do know is that Hamilton has built a meaningful points advantage. We know Leclerc has already secured a major victory. We know he has 3 podiums. We know 2 retirements have affected his campaign. We know Ferrari sits second in the Constructors' Championship, and we know Szafnauer believes Ferrari should support Leclerc rather than turn his current form into a formal mid-season intervention. Those are the facts we can work with. Everything beyond that is interpretation, and my interpretation is that Ferrari's biggest opportunity may be to keep the situation calm. Leclerc does not need the team to remind him that Hamilton is ahead. He knows. Every driver in Formula One knows exactly where the championship stands. What Leclerc needs is a car he can trust, engineers who understand what he's asking for, and the freedom to attack the problem without feeling that every difficult session has become a referendum on his future. That is why Szafnauer's advice deserves attention. Leave him alone sounds harsh when you hear it without context, but in context, it means something very different. Give him room, give him support, keep working, and let the driver respond. Because if Leclerc really has started closing the gap to Hamilton, the worst thing Ferrari could do may be to mistake a developing recovery for a crisis. The season is not decided by one mid-season table, and the relationship between 2 teammates is not defined by 1 points difference. There are still races ahead. There are still opportunities. There are still technical questions to answer. And there is still a championship battle involving both Ferrari and Mercedes. So for now, the most interesting question may not be whether Ferrari should call Leclerc into a meeting. It may be whether Ferrari can simply give him what Szafnauer believes he needs most: support without unnecessary pressure. Because if Charles Leclerc continues the progress Szafnauer says he has seen over the last 2 races, Ferrari may eventually look back at this moment and realize that the best decision was not to force a solution. Sometimes in Formula One, the smartest move is not making a bigger move. It's letting the driver do his job. And if Leclerc can turn that recent progress into a sustained run of strong results, the entire Hamilton-Leclerc conversation could look very different before the season is over. For Ferrari, that would be the ideal outcome. Not a dramatic internal intervention, not another distraction, just 2 elite drivers pushing each other, a team working to close the gap to Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc proving on the circuit why Ferrari continues to place its confidence in him. That is where the story stands right now. Hamilton has the stronger championship position. Leclerc has already shown flashes of winning form. Szafnauer believes Leclerc is getting closer. Smedley believes the current teammate advantage is unusual for Charles. And Ferrari has a 72-point constructors deficit to Mercedes that remains the bigger championship problem. So the next chapter will not be decided by what happens in a meeting room. It will be decided by what happens when the lights go out. And that is precisely why Ferrari may want to take Szafnauer's advice. Stop trying to manufacture the answer. Keep supporting Charles, and let the next race tell them how much progress he has really made. If I were watching Ferrari closely from this point forward, that is the one thing I would be watching above everything else. Not simply the points gap, not simply the qualifying order, but the trend. Is Leclerc continuing to move toward Hamilton? Is the car becoming more comfortable for him? Are the technical changes around the braking system helping him? And can Ferrari turn individual victories and podiums into the consistency it needs to challenge Mercedes? Those answers will tell us much more than any formal mid-season conversation ever could. And for now, according to Szafnauer, the best thing Ferrari can do is surprisingly simple: support Charles, keep working, and let him drive.